the content of my third policy address to the citizens. And in fact, the text of the policy address has already been uploaded to the website of the government. Mr. Wu Chi-wai, leave the chamber. Via the media, I have also explained the main points of the policy address. I'm happy to take questions from members at this moment. Wu Chi-wai, leave the chamber.
All right, what you're seeing now is Carrie Lam attending Legislative Council meeting where she is answering questions put by lawmakers on her policy address.
Please leave the chamber immediately.
We're seeing some opposition lawmakers boycotting the whole session, as what they did yesterday. They interrupted twice over Carrie Lam's attempted policy address live at the Legislative Council, so she has to put a pre-taped recording of her policy address yesterday. We can't really get what the opposition lawmaker is talking about right now, but apparently the whole session is being interrupted. In her address yesterday, Lam promised to improve public welfare, and she said the government will try its best to help children with special needs and also provide student grants that relieve
Mr. Wu Chi-wai,
burdens.
please leave the chamber immediately. I will repeat once again. This question and answer session is an occasion that many citizens would like to have this opportunity to see questions being put to the Chief Executive. This is a constitutional duty of members. I hope you will allow this session to go on so that citizens can watch the questions put to the Chief Executive on the policy address, and then we can get detailed answers. What is our point of order? In the past few months, for those who have injured and died, an apology is not a point of order. If you continue, in a moment when you have your chance to ask questions, you may put this to her and ask her to give an answer. Chief Executive, I'm happy to take questions from members. Mr. Gary Chen. Mr. Jeremy Tam, please leave the chamber immediately.
Now we're seeing that Hong Kong Chief Executive Carrie Lam is trying to answer questions put by lawmakers on her policy address yesterday, but it is severely interrupted by the opposition lawmakers there. They're chanting about their demands, but currently we don't know about the concrete contents of their boycotting. But in her address, Lam has a promise to improve public welfare mainly, and that's what her policy address, her third policy address, was mainly about. And she is seeking to quell the unrest that has beset her city by spending more on housing and public welfare. She proposed this on Wednesday in her latest policy address, which was pre-recorded after opposition lawmakers interrupted her attempt to deliver it live. And the opposition lawmakers boycotting the whole session was sent out of the site.
can allow me 3 minutes to ask my question before you express your political stance. I know that before the policy address was released, the CS, Mr. Matthew Cheung, wrote a blog. He said that this policy address will not be the same, it will not stick to old ways. I remember yesterday when the CE delivered her policy address, she devoted a lot of coverage, and I know she spent a lot of efforts to mapping out her housing and land policy. I appreciate her efforts, but I can't see from the policy address how she is going to help the middle class, the elderly, and other classes in society, and how you can show your new style of governance. We have asked you to provide also a concessionary card for people between the age of 60 and 65. And you have not responded to all those, and that is to help the plight of those between 60 and 65. Therefore, Mr. Matthew Cheung's 3 no's do not apply to this policy address. This policy address is really very much the same. It sticks to old ways, and it is more or less the same as before. We'd like to know the principles of your governance, and actually many Hong Kong people would like you, Chief Executive, to respond to the disorderly situation in society in the policy address. Many people are telling us that when it comes to the weekend, on Saturdays and Sundays, there will be a lot of chaos. There will be the throwing of petrol bombs and road blockades and arson, and they dare not go out. Banks and eating establishments have been targeted for vandalism. If you just say, "I am Chinese," you may be beaten up by a group of people, and you may be subject to lynch law. In the past 4 months, social order and the rule of law have been trashed. Ms. Tanya Chen, please leave the chamber. Since the CS has talked about something that will not be the same, I'd like the CE to let us know whether you can help us have shops that will be defended against vandalism, that people can have no fear if they want to go out, and that when people want to say something in society, they would be free from violence. Ms. Chief Executive, can you promise us those? CE, thank you for the question, Mr. Gary Chan. Dr. KK Kwok, please leave the chamber.
After Lawmaker asked Carrie Lam a question, the whole session has been interrupted again, giving no chance for Carrie Lam to answer the question right now.
Dr. KK Kwok, please leave the chamber at once.
And so far, 3 opposite lawmakers have been sent out of the venue.
Please leave the chamber at once. Please leave the chamber at once. Please leave the chamber at once. Mr. Xiu Ka-chun, please leave the chamber at once.
That was Carrie Lam attending a Legislative Council meeting where she was supposed to answer questions put by lawmakers on her policy address on Wednesday, and after being interrupted for several times by the opposition lawmakers, the whole session has to be adjourned. And now for more on everything that just happened, let's talk to our current affairs commentator, Mr. Ina Tangen. Tangen, hello there. Welcome to our show. Chaos yesterday, chaos today again. But today is different. Today is not policy address. Today is the opportunity for every Legislative Council members to ask questions, to challenge Carrie Lam, to show your dissatisfaction in a legitimate way, but they didn't. They gave up all that. Instead, they boycotted again. Why do you think they did that?
Well, quite frankly, as we discussed yesterday, they keep saying into the international press that they want their voices to be heard, but they're not interested in having anybody else's heard. They clearly had a strategy where one by one they would continue to interrupt the session until it was in essence
to what
over.
End?
Well, they think that they are causing an international stir, that this is somehow affecting mainland China, and it's not. It's actually, the sad part is it is doing away with any kind of future that Hong Kong could have. You tell me what kind of business group or family wants to live in a place which is being governed by, in essence, an unruly mob, where you can, as the legislature said, be afraid when you're walking down the street, whether a petrol bomb or whether there'll be a riot or a group of black-clad young men armed with pipes and masks running around. I mean, as he said yesterday when we talked about this, a young man just simply being harassed because he spoke Mandarin, just said, look, we're all Chinese. And then was promptly beaten by a mob. This shows you that things have gotten out of control. Carrie Lam's challenge now is to figure out how she's going to respond to what has now become an uncivil situation.
Right, and so the eventual purpose of boycotting both the address and the Q&A session today is probably not for the benefit of Hong Kong.
No, it's not for the benefit. It's for the protesters feel that if they make enough noise, they show enough signs, they engage in enough brutality, that somehow they can bring this to a head. Obviously, they're looking for some sort of reaction. They're trying to push Beijing into actively interceding, and then they will claim to the world that they were right all along, that China has repressed them, that they don't have freedom of rights and things like this. So what you're seeing here is basically a PR campaign, which is being waged by them in order to, ultimately, the end game is to get a violent reaction or some sort of reaction from Beijing.
But what does all the boycotting, especially today, mean to other legislators who really have questions to ask?
Well, they're not going to be allowed to do that. I mean, the purpose of this is to make sure that there is not a civil forum to discuss what the real issues are, which are economic. You heard the one gentleman talking about it. He said, look, people are afraid to come out during the weekends. Their shops are being vandalized, torched. They can't walk the streets, and they're afraid to even voice an opinion for fear of being beaten up. In those kinds of situations, they're saying, what can you do? Protect us. He also dealt with the issues of economic concern. How are these housing projects going to address different issues? He brought up a kind of a perceived gap in Hong Kong's social welfare, which is this point between 60 and 65. He's asking that there be some relief for that. Now, Hong Kong is in a very unusual situation in that all monies that are created in Hong Kong stay there. There's no money that is sent back to Beijing or to mainland China. Everything stays there, and in fact, quite the opposite. China heavily subsidizes, not only with policies that are beneficial to Hong Kong, but also direct investment. So there's going to be an eventual question, how is this all paid for? Now, before we were also heard from a gentleman who started talking about getting 90% loans and things like this. The issue in Hong Kong is yes, loans, that's part of it, but the real issue is the price. And pushing loans higher just means that perhaps the marketplace would go up. What they need are more homes. They need a policy that allows people on ordinary incomes to actually get homes. And you've seen that in places like Singapore. It is achievable. The question is there will to do it?
Right, and actually one legislator just got the chance to ask the question, which is a very good question actually, and Carrie Lam didn't have the opportunity to answer it. The legislator said, unlike what it was described, the policy address was not sticking to the old ways. Instead, stick to the old ways. It's the same kind of content with the last year. But Carrie Lam actually said why she chose to have a blue cover of this policy address is because she wants to this set of policy to press the reset button for Hong Kong. So what do you think? Do you think this policy, the new policy, is powerful enough to press the reset button?
Well, I haven't looked at all 220 measures that have been proposed. We know the general areas. I was hoping that there would be something more about increasing the minimum wage in Hong Kong, because, as I said, it's really about income. You can't afford anything if you don't have it. So there's also the issue about freeing up land. There have been some moves recently. Some of the larger families, the 100 families that control most of the vast majority of wealth in Hong Kong, have indicated they're willing to set aside more land for development. But it's really not just setting aside the land. There has to be an active, proactive means by which people can say, look, you will only pay 10% of your property for 20, 25 years, and then you will own it. The government has to do this because the local people are competing in prices against very wealthy financial executives from all over the world. They can't possibly do it. So they're in a situation where they either have to choose to leave Hong Kong or to live in Hong Kong on very, very meager existence with no real hope of a future.
All right, thank you very much indeed, current affairs commentator, Mr. Ina Tangen. And with all that, we come to the end of this edition of The World Today on CGTN. I'm Li Dongling in Beijing. Thanks for being with us.